Good evening, everyone. Again, thank you so much for coming to our program, hosted by Appalachian Voices. My name is Kara Doughton. I'm part of the New Economy program team, and I work out of the Central Appalachian office in Norton, Virginia. So just a couple of general housekeeping, kind of informational things. This is a short year. So 2025 odd numbered year means that we have a shorter legislative session. So it's 45 days and it's already kicked off after a brief hiccup with some water issues in Richmond, Virginia. So that includes the weekends. It did start on the 8th and then it will end on February 22nd. And this is taking place in Richmond. But please note the bullet point below. There are options to view and testify at committee hearings remotely. So there are ways to get involved at many different levels. And then the lineup in the House of Delegates and Senate this year, we have a Democratic majority in the House of Delegates and then a Democratic majority in the Senate. And those numbers are on the slide. I did want to go ahead and remind everyone quickly that this is being recorded, and the plan originally was to live stream. I'm not sure if that's happening or not. Just please note that that might be happening. And if everyone wants to just drop quickly in the chat where you are joining from, it would be nice to see where everyone's coming from this evening. There's some opportunities for everybody to get involved. If you've already gotten involved, that's great. If not, we'd love to have you join. You can book meetings, see your legislator, let us know if you want help with that. We can help you schedule a meeting. There are upcoming lobby days. We've already had a water lobby day that was hosted by BCN, but there's upcoming days that you can join. January 20th is going to be Data Center Reform Lobby Day. And January 22nd, next week, is going to be Conservation Lobby Day. And then there's also an opportunity to get involved and take action by sending emails, writing letters, making calls if you don't necessarily have the time means to make it up to Richmond this year. So stay tuned for our action alerts, especially ahead of key committee meetings. And we will also have a lunchtime call-in event on January 24th. I believe that's next Friday. One quick note as well, that if you have any questions about the bills that we're going to go through, please drop those in the chat during the webinar and we will respond to those at some point, or maybe during the Q&A, depending when they come in. So just wanted to talk a little bit about our priorities this year. Defending progress on climate change, always huge. Making sure data center growth is done in a way to protect communities. Encouraging the expansion of clean energy and enacting safeguards for methane gas pipeline leaks. So we'll go into a little more detail there. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to my colleague, Peter Anderson, who's right in the middle of the action in Richmond.
Hey, thanks, Kara. And thanks everybody again for joining us this evening. I appreciate folks getting active in the chat and sharing with us where you're watching from this evening. I see a great geographic diversity. So welcome to folks from Northern Virginia to Southwest Virginia, New River Valley, South Side, Pennsylvania, Richmond and the surrounding counties. It looks like we've got a great group of folks. So thank you for joining and thanks for following Appalachian Voices. My name is Peter Anderson. Started working with Appalachian Voices in 2016. I'm our Director of State Energy Policy. So while I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia, I moved to Richmond for every legislative session so that I don't miss any of the action. So I will kick us off. Kara gave us a great preview of the kind of 4 sections that we're going to talk about programmatically, but let's dive right in here with defending the progress we've made on clean energy and climate change over the last few years. So if you're new to Virginia, you should know that we have a clean energy policy mandating a transition to carbon-free electricity by mid-century. If you've been in Virginia for a while, you know that's called the Virginia Clean Economy Act, and it's a policy that passed in 2020, and every year since then, we have had to defend in the halls of the General Assembly against rollbacks and attacks on that clean energy policy that we have for the Commonwealth. So our number one priority, unfortunately, has to be year after year after year, defending the progress we've already made. And so we're involved in doing that again this year. the bills that I've listed here on this slide are just a sampling. It's kind of there's a literal smorgasbord of bills that would undermine our clean energy policy or roll it back entirely. And so, just a quick sampling here. The first bill I've got listed on this slide, Delegate Kilgore has it in the House and Senator Stanley has it in the Senate, would simply make the Virginia Clean Economy Act a suggestion rather than something that we can make our electric utilities comply with. The second bill I've got listed on this slide from Delegate Freitas goes into the Virginia Clean Economy Act and would make some really significant changes that would eliminate our future carbon regulation. It would eliminate the existing requirement to retire our polluting carbon emitting power plants by mid-century. It would try to repeal some of the investments and incentives that we've got to develop a clean energy economy to replace that dirty fossil fuel economy. So, of course, we're opposed to HB 2185 as well. And then, sorry, I'm going to move pretty quickly through this because we've got a lot of content to get to. So the last set of bills I've listed on this slide, duplicate bills from Delegate Bloxham and Delegate Wilt, would allow things that are not clean energy to count as clean energy under Virginia law. So in this instance, they're talking about using fuels that are either natural gas itself or derived from a chemical process that uses natural gas to then go ahead and make electricity with that. And they would call that clean energy as well if they got their way. So I do have good news. Senate Bill 902 up here at the top of this slide has already been defeated. But this is just a kind of, it was in committee, I believe, yesterday and did not advance. So again, this is just a sampling. There are probably at least a dozen more of these that we are tracking and working to ensure do not become law and change our good clean energy policies that we have on the books today. So with that, let's move to the next slide. I think so. The other thing I'm going to talk to you about this evening is the sort of hot topic of 2024, 2025. If you've opened a Virginia newspaper, or gosh, I shouldn't even say newspaper. If you've scrolled on your phone, you've probably seen headlines in Virginia news about data center growth and what that means for Virginia. You've probably seen both positive and negative coverage of this issue. And our state legislative research agency published a report in December studying a lot of the different issues related to data centers. We're looking at both the pros and the cons, and the report said basically data centers have brought a lot of tax revenue to Virginia localities, and it has created a lot of construction jobs. And you know, county governments like that, people like that. But at the same time, it's brought a lot of risks and harms to the Commonwealth, and this is just the beginning of what the industry wants to do. So I want to be clear that, you know, we all use and benefit from internet servers. We wouldn't be able to do this webinar without relying on data centers, but we do, as we think about more data centers being added in Virginia, which is the world capital of data centers. We have to think about what comes with that, you know, both the pros and the cons. And so Appalachian Voices has been working in coalition with several other mostly environmental groups and public interest nonprofits. And we've all agreed that as data centers continue to come to Virginia, and we continue to get some of those benefits, that we've agreed that these 4 principles or 4 pillars are the bare minimum that should be required as we continue to welcome those facilities into the Commonwealth. So the first pillar is ratepayer protection. The JLARC study said that Virginia's monthly electric bills could rise by as much as $37 a month over the next 15 years if data center development continues without any any rules in place. So we've got to get some rules in place to protect customers from that increasing power bill every month. The second pillar is transparency. A lot of what happens, the public doesn't get to know about, and you should have a right to know about natural resource usage in your community. Data centers are notorious for using a lot of electricity and a lot of water. The servers get really hot and need to be cooled, so they run air conditioning as they run their data centers 24 hours a day. So we'll talk more about that in the subsequent slides. State oversight is our third pillar. This is basically just we need an expert agency making some rules for the road when it comes to our electric grid and how much energy these facilities use. And then finally, incentives. Virginia already has a very generous tax incentive. That's why data centers have moved into Northern Virginia mostly, and now the rest of the state increasingly, because we do have a very generous tax credit to attract these companies to Virginia. And so this principle is basically, if we're going to give taxpayer dollars to these large tech companies, we should only be giving it to them if at all. Some people think we do have legislation pending that would repeal that tax credit entirely. But if we're going to incentivize that industry in Virginia at all, they should have to earn it. They should have to be meeting public interest goals if they're going to get that financial carrot from all of us, the taxpayers. So those are the principles. I'll give you a little bit more detail on the bills that our alliance is supporting in the following slides. So back to ratepayer protection, and by that I mean fairness about who pays. Is your electric bill going to go up every month so that Amazon can get richer? Or so that's the real fundamental question here. And so we are supporting House Bill 2101 from Delegate Michelle Maldonado and Senate Bill 960 from Senator Perry, who is from Loudoun County. She represents what is known as Data Center Alley. And this bill would ask our state's electric utility regulator to study whether or not residential ratepayers like you and me are subsidizing the data center industry on our bills. And if the SCC finds that we are overpaying because the data center industry is not covering like the cost of new transmission infrastructure or the cost of new electric generation that needs to be built because of their electricity demand, well, the SCC must make rules to get rid of that cross subsidy and make sure that the data center is paying its own way and that bills are fair. So the next slide, talk about the transparency bills that we are supporting with this alliance. House Bill 2035 from Delegate Shelley Simons would ask our state Department of Environmental Quality to collect key information from data centers about their water use, their electricity use, any of the other kinds of things that impact the environment, their land use, the footprint that they have, and how's that relevant information that people want to know? People, if you're going to be neighbors with a data center, you want to know about it. So this is a transparency bill that would require DEQ to publish that information in an online clearinghouse that would be accessible to the public so that you will be able to know what's going on. Similarly, House Bill 1601 from Delegate Josh Thomas, who represents Prince William County, which is sort of the second most popular county in Virginia right now for data centers. Josh Thomas takes a recommendation from the JLARC study, which is to require developers of data centers to provide localities with a noise study. Now, I didn't actually, this was news to me, but apparently there are a lot of impacts related to the noise that these facilities make, especially if they're sited right next to a residential neighborhood. So the noise study would have to be submitted to your local county board of supervisors and made part of the public process when your city council or your county board is deciding whether or not to allow that data center to be located where they would like to build. Delegate Thomas's bill also includes other information similar to what's in Delegate Simon's bill, so that the local government has that key information at its fingertips. Next slide, please. Back to our electric utility regulator. We're living in a world right now where these new data centers are not actually regulated. What happens today is a company wants to build a data center and they talk to your electric utility and they say, I would like to plug in my warehouse that has a bunch of servers in it to the electric grid. And oh, by the way, we have a very high electricity demand. When can you plug us into the grid? When can you serve us? And the electric utility, uses its in-house expertise with their staff of engineers and other professionals, and they figure it out behind closed doors. And they might tell the data center, we can connect you in 1 year, or we can connect you in 3 years, or actually, you've got a gigawatt worth of electricity demand. It's going to be 7 years before we can connect you. But gosh darn it, we're going to build all that new infrastructure and connect you as soon as we can. We want to do that, and we're required to serve anyone who asks. And so that's a problem, that we don't have our expert electricity regulator who's in charge of our monthly power bills and who's in charge of a lot of the technical aspects of making sure we have reliable electricity. That expert regulator is not involved today. So Delegate Josh Thomas, with his bill 2027 in the House, would get that expert regulator involved so they are the final arbiter of some of these extremely large load centers, as they're called. A high load facility is something that has 100 megawatts of demand or higher, so that we make sure we get some guardrails on it. Delegate Thomas's bill asks the utility regulator to make sure that if a data center is going to get connected to the electric grid, that there are no threats to electric reliability, that costs would be borne fairly by the users, like we talked about earlier. And there would also be, in this bill, the data center would have to meet certain clean energy requirements, and other environmental factors would go into that SCC decision. So we think this is a good bill. Let's go to the next slide. And then finally, we talked about the generous, there we go. We talked about the generous state tax incentive that Virginia already offers for data centers to move into our state. There are some very well-intentioned bills here, and can we go back? Sometimes those buttons are really sensitive. So let's see here. The state tax credit, it does need reform. Right now, it's very generous, and there are really no responsibilities on the data center company. They don't have to do anything special to get that tax credit, except they have to show that they're hiring people and bringing a certain amount of economic investment to the state. But it doesn't have some of the other important things attached to that money. So Delegate Sullivan and Senator Deeds both have bills where they are striving to ensure that the only folks who are going to get this generous sales tax credit, they're only going to get it if they are meeting energy efficiency standards and if they are using clean energy going forward. And you might not know this, but data centers always have backup generators in case there's a power outage on the electric grid. They all use large diesel generators to back up their power. So Delegate Sullivan and Senator Deeds would also require that those diesel generators, actually Senator Deeds' bill says they can't use diesel generators, which are very dirty. Delegate Sullivan's bill is a little bit different and would require data centers to use the cleanest available backup generation. So similar bills share the same goals. I only say that we are tracking versus supporting these bills at this time because, as happens every year in the legislative process, a lot of stakeholders are involved, proposing a lot of different changes to the language of the bills. And so I can't tell you today that Appalachian Voices supports these bills, but we do absolutely support the goals of Delegate Sullivan and Senator Deeds in what they've put out there. And I'm fingers crossed that we're going to be able to add these to our support columns going forward. Now, I think I'm going to pass the microphone here to my colleague, Matt Allenbaugh, to talk about the rest of our priorities.
Thank you, Peter. Energy efficiency this year. So a set of energy efficiency bills that we support, excuse me, and have worked with a number of other organizations on this session are HB 1935 and SB 777. And they're based on a Maryland law from 2021 that would establish a one-year task force to evaluate the accessibility of energy efficiency resources for low-income households, identify the key barriers hindering energy efficiency retrofits and weatherization efforts, and develop a plan and budget to enhance energy efficiency in all low-income households within the next decade. And high utility bills are forcing Virginians to choose between essentials like groceries and medication and keeping their home at a safe temperature during hot summers and cold winters. A household's energy burden is the percentage of their income spent on utilities. An energy burden higher than 6% is considered unaffordable. Virginia currently has the 10th least affordable residential energy bills in the country, and with over 75% of Virginia households having an energy burden of higher than the 6% affordability threshold. Weatherization repairs and energy efficiency upgrades can help households reduce their energy burden and improve health, comfort, and safety. There are estimated to be over 150,000 low-income homes in Virginia that are good candidates for retrofits. Energy efficiency providers, state agencies, and advocates have been working tirelessly on this issue for years, but it needs a more dedicated approach and prioritization from the Commonwealth to fully succeed. Without a legislative stick, the status quo is likely to continue, which doesn't come close to solving affordability concerns. Virginia needs to require data sharing from utilities and state agencies, a dedicated workforce development plan to meet the unmet need, and a push from across the board to make this happen. And as an update on Senate Bill 777, it advanced out of Senate General Laws and Technology Committee with bipartisan support just before this webinar started. So we can jump to the next slide. Clean energy will be a heavily debated topic in this year's General Assembly session. A suite of bills that we support is known as Community Access to Renewable Energy that will increase investments to clean energy for our communities. This suite of bills will lower energy costs for consumers, increasing investments in clean energy and energy storage, and will allow Virginia to produce clean energy when it's cheap and abundant and store it locally. By giving Virginians more control over energy supply and costs, we make energy less expensive for Virginia consumers. They will also enhance Virginia's energy independence. Expanding our use of and harnessing local renewable energy allows us to produce energy here at home and therefore reduces Virginia's reliance on foreign oil and gas. By harnessing local energy solutions, Virginia ensures consumers aren't beholden to foreign companies and gives Virginians more control over their energy. The first set of bills in this suite is HB 1883 and Senate Bill 1040. And these do a number of things to either remove barriers or mandate development in places where most folks say they want solar development to be focused. First, it defines behind-the-meter solar. Behind the meter refers to solar and battery systems on a home or business that would be on the customer side of the utility meter and used primarily for on-site energy needs and is often sited on rooftops. It increases the percentage of behind-the-meter solar to 3 megawatts in size or smaller that Dominion is required to develop, up to 8% in 2030 and afterwards to meet their renewable portfolio standard requirement. Of this behind the meter solar, 25% will need to be low-income qualifying projects. It also increases the requirement of solar developed on previously developed project sites to 1,000 megawatts, up from 200 megawatts. And previously developed project sites include brownfields, property that has previously been used for retail, commercial, or industrial purposes, a parking lot, previously mined lands, quarries, or landfills. We can think about these places as places where there have already been, where the landscape has already been significantly altered. Finally, it removes the minimum size limits for power purchase agreements, which is good for schools and churches that are interested in installing solar on their buildings. And we can jump to the next slide. This pair of bills, HB 2356, Munden King, and SB 853, Senator Rouse. This pair of bills are aimed at ensuring that there are good, strong workforce development and wage standards on clean energy work sites. Think good, clean jobs. They require that public service companies, their contractors and subcontractors who are working on renewable energy projects larger than 1 megawatt pay prevailing wages. And prevailing wage laws are beneficial in promoting high industry standards by ensuring market wages and benefits are going to all workers. These laws additionally require that 15% of the total labor hours on a project are performed by qualified apprentices to develop the next generation of clean energy workforce and ensures a steady pipeline of Virginia electricians well trained in clean energy technologies. These bills also establish a penalty for companies that don't comply. And with that, I'd like to pass it to Austin Counts, the Southwest Virginia Solar and Electrification Project Manager.
Thank you, Matt, and good evening, everybody. As Matt said, I'm with our New Economy program as the Solar and Electrification Projects Manager. I'm located out of Norton, Virginia. So if you're in far Southwest Virginia, always feel free to reach out. The final set of bills that I was hoping to share a little bit about and that we're supporting in the Community Access to Renewable Energy Suite is HB 2346 with Delegate Hernandez and Senate Bill 1100 with Senator Hashmi. And essentially, these bills direct Appalachian Power and Dominion Energy to establish their first virtual power plant pilot programs. A little bit of a tongue twister there. Essentially, for those who haven't heard about virtual power plants, this is a collection of hundreds or thousands of individual devices at the household or business level. These can include smart thermostats, water heaters, electric vehicles, batteries, solar arrays, and batteries attached to solar arrays that will be able to be controlled virtually and cycled on and off time during peak hours to reduce demand on the grid while having minimal impact on household or building comfort. Essentially, this collection of individual devices being turned off will be able to reduce demand on the grid instead of requiring a power plant to cycle on to produce more electricity. This bill will require the Virginia utilities to aggregate distributed energy resources to help meet that peak demand and maintain reliability while incentivizing building owners with this equipment for the ability to do so. These incentives will also be increased for lower income customers in areas, and the program establishes a broader electric school bus program as part of the grid transformation efforts throughout the state. Next slide, please. Additionally, a budget amendment that we're supporting this year is item 109-4S with Senator Marsden. This amendment provides $20 million to support the Virginia Brownfield and Coal Mine Renewable Energy Grant Fund, more kind of lovingly known as the Virginia Brightfields Program. Essentially, this program will help develop coal fields and brownfields as new renewable energy generation sites. This program was actually created in 2021 as patroned by Delegate Terry Kilgore, but has yet to receive any funding to disperse to qualifying projects. So we're really hoping to see this pass this year. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Jessica Sims.
Thanks, Austin. I'm Jessica Sims. I'm the Virginia Field Coordinator. I'm based in the Richmond area. And I have a pretty quick one to present that is important for our programmatic work. Thanks to everybody in attendance tonight who advocates as it comes to fighting pipelines in the Appalachian region. This is one that is related to that, but is truly about public safety. HB 2545 from Delegate Sam Rizul, who has made advocacy on this issue a very large focus, has a new bill this session that would require odorant for transmission lines. So we know within businesses or households, if you have gas coming to that facility or your home, they add a chemical additive or odorant, mercaptan, to add a rotten egg smell to the line so that you would be aware if there were a leak, a problem, and you can notify emergency personnel, the gas company. When you get to the higher diameter pipes, and that's the transmission lines, there is no requirement in Virginia to add odorant. And that's really a safety gap. So this bill addresses that, and its intention is to make a common sense approach to making more information accessible for the company to know if there's an issue, to provide a quicker response time for community members to report a problem, to notify emergency personnel, and to just fill that gap of what is a helpful safety measure. The second component of this bill talks about high consequence areas. When pipelines are routed, there is a determination of levels of the HCA, the high consequence area. Some examples of that are they near a population center, and they get a certain rating based on that. What is not adequately addressed at this time is locations where there is one road for both entry and exit from living areas, so that if pipelines were and are, as we know, in the case of Mountain Valley Pipeline, routed across roads that are the only entry exit point, that makes it very difficult should there be a leak which can sometimes lead to an explosion or incident, for folks to be able to exit that space. And so this bill also asks the State Corporation Commission, with the authority that they do have, to take a look at those classifications and see if they can be broadened to include that type of road issue and access issue. And this bill is likely to go to the House Labor and Commerce Committee next week. And with that, I will pause for a moment. We're going to stop sharing as we are going to go into Q&A. And I invite folks to please place any questions that they might have directly into the chat about any of the pieces of legislation you heard about this evening. We covered a lot, and a lot of it is very technical, but lots of great pairings of bills on important issues. So please place any questions you have in the chat. And I'll kind of kick us off with one. I wonder, Peter, for the data center bills, are any of the pillars that you mentioned finding support on both sides of the aisle? Is there an aspect of this that is really embraced overall by the GA?
Yeah, absolutely. And Jessica, just as a quick aside, I think, is it your intent to stop recording during Q&A?
No,
or was that supposed to keep going?
Yeah, we can keep recording.
Okay. All right, gotcha. Okay, well, good question. Jessica asked if there's bipartisan support for some of the pillars that we have, some of our priorities around responsible data center growth. The answer is yes. Actually, a number of legislators who are both either the patron of the bill or a co-patron of some of these bills held a joint press conference yesterday. And this included both Democrats and Republicans who are patrons and co-patrons of these bills. So it's some of the coverage was in the media this morning, and well, I can't tell you if any of the bills are advancing, and so as we would say, have legs yet, because a lot of them haven't been heard in committee at this time. But certainly our legislators all are aware of the seriousness of the issue. And all, most of them have concerns about the kitchen table issues, like how much your power bill costs each month. And a lot of the legislators that are involved tend to be more from the places that have data centers in their locality. But there's an increasing interest across the Commonwealth as the data centers start to be proposed in more and more places.
Thanks so much, Peter. And a question from the chat, didn't the JLARC study focus on unconstrained total demand? What impact would efficiency of data centers really have regarding total demand?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Jackie. Appreciate that. So this is one thing that I probably didn't say, so it's a good reminder. JLARC stands for the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission. It's again, it's the research arm of the Virginia General Assembly, sort of nonpartisan government research. The study that JLARC published in December did, to your question, talk about what would happen with unconstrained electricity growth, unconstrained data center development. What would its impact be on our power grid? What would it do to us? Couple of things to keep. So the answer to that is JLARC said if data center development continues sort of unconstrained, then by the year 2040, which hard to believe that's only 15 years away, the electricity demand in Virginia would be nearly triple what it is today. I'm sorry, I should have had a slide in there with a nice graphic so that we could really visualize and wrap our heads around this. Nearly triple the electricity demand that Virginia has today. Another thing that a lot of folks don't know is that for about the last 15 years, Virginia experienced virtually zero electricity demand growth. We've sort of, if you were looking at a bar graph, the curve would be flat. And another thing that folks should know is that the report found, and we also know from a lot of the things we do with our utility regulator, that the projected electricity demand growth, and this is, sorry, if this is getting a little wonky, I do apologize. The thing that I think people understand the most is, are there going to be rolling blackouts, right? Are the lights going to go out because we're using too much in a sort of a peak hour of the day? What a lot of people don't know, but I will mention, is that residential customers like you and me, our demand for electricity has been relatively flat for the last 15 years. And the growth that is projected is almost entirely attributable to these large customers, industrial customers, most of whom are data centers. So if you think about a tripling of growth, and it's not us. So that's when we get into the issues about fairness, and also the issues about grid reliability. She also asked about efficiency. One of the pieces of good news, I don't mean to be fear-mongering here. One of the pieces of good news is the technology is always changing. So one of the leading manufacturers of the processors that go into data centers announced almost a year ago, they've got a new platform. It's the most popular platform used by data centers, that says it's about 25 to 50 times more efficient than their last platform. So it kind of depends. We are definitely in a brave new world, and we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But there's a lot they can do to cool the buildings more efficiently. So there's hope.
Thanks, Peter. I think the next question is going to be for Matt. Is there a bipartisan support for the Energy Efficiency Task Force? And what are the arguments against those measures, if there are any?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. So I think what we saw shortly before this webinar is there's absolutely bipartisan support for energy efficiency measures, kind of across the state. Legislators are hearing from their constituents about how high utility bills have gotten. Kind of in Southwest Virginia, in the APCO territory, where I live, utility bills have increased by roughly 48%, I believe, since just 2021. So legislators, both sides of the aisle, are hearing about this, and really the cheapest energy we can use the cheapest energy is the energy we don't use at all. So in terms of the second part of your question was arguments against those measures. We have not. We have heard very positive feedback kind of on this. It's based on a Maryland bill that passed a couple of years ago, and energy efficiency measures generally kind of improve in addition to reducing like household utility costs, also tend to make air quality and comfort improve. So it's good for your wallet and good for your lungs.
Thanks so much, Matt. We've got some more questions coming in, and we'll be taking those until about 6:45. After that time, Matt's going to walk us through next steps of how to take action and participate in advocacy this GA session. Since we are recording this, want to bring some that have been answered, but there's a question: is that the lack of demand growth residentially that was mentioned attributable to a lack of electrification residentially also? Peter, would you be able to share your answers on that?
Oh yeah, sorry, I was just typing them in the chat to Andrew. So Andrew, yeah, keen observation. We haven't done a whole lot of electrification in Virginia yet. But the main driver of flat electricity demand over the past 15 years, the experts attribute most of that to gains in energy efficiency. So 15 years ago, think about it, were you using like LED light bulbs 15 years ago? If you were like cutting edge. Now we've replaced most of our like really inefficient incandescent bulbs with LEDs. You used to have to change a light bulb like every 3 years, and now you got these light bulbs that last for 30 years because they use hardly any energy at all. So that's what we're talking about here with gains in energy efficiency. I mean, it's just a good example of it. But Andrew also observes, a lack of electrification, like things that we use fossil fuels for today that we might want to decarbonize by making them electric in the future, like your car, like the way a lot of Virginians rely on gas furnaces to heat their homes, and gas stoves are pretty prevalent as well. Electrifying those things, sure, that should drive some electricity demand growth. But of course, all of those appliances are getting more and more efficient as well. You think of Energy Star certified appliances. The magic of heat pumps, my goodness, what a revelation. I mean, these things are like, I can't even explain it, but it's like moving thermal energy from the place that's warmer to the place that you want to be warmer. So efficient. A lot of what I've been hearing lately about being able to use not just air source heat pumps, but ground source heat pumps as well for home heating is really exciting. We're just like starting, we haven't deployed these technologies yet. So hopefully as we're electrifying, it's not going to put a huge hit on how much electricity we use. We could talk all day about that. I'm sorry for being so wordy.
So I've got two to three questions I want to try and hit on, and maybe some of them can go together. I'm going to go out of order a little bit, but we have a question from Robert. Are there any bills that support EV infrastructure around the state, especially in Southwest Virginia? Peter's nodding his head.
I don't want to hog the mic, but yes, there's a bill, and actually Delegate Sullivan has been working on this for a couple of years. I think it's, my apologies if I don't get all the details right. It is setting up funding for EV chargers in the rural parts of Virginia. I believe it's through our taxes to fund that. But I can follow up with you, Robert, because I'll get you the bill number because it's a good bill that a lot of our allies have been working on.
Thanks, Peter. So let's close out with this question, but if you do have more, just keep putting them in the chat. But we want to move to the next part of tonight's program. Jackie's asking, what mix of renewable energy can reasonably be expected to meet our demand, given our large reliance on gas and coal generation, much of it starting in West Virginia? Jackie said they keep hearing there just isn't enough generation of energy from renewables. Peter, can you address that, or others?
I've got a I got to start on an
Oh.
answer, but happy to happy to happy to be joined by my colleagues. So Jackie, that's a really astute question. So if you think about it today, the electricity generated in Virginia today, about 45% of it is combustion of natural gas. And we've got about another 5 to 10% of it being combustion of coal in Virginia today. And then our folks who most of Southwest Virginia is served by Appalachian Power Company. Their power plants are located not in Virginia, but in West Virginia. And so most Appalachian Power Company customers living in Virginia are receiving electricity that was generated about 90% from coal. Virginia is a much cleaner grid than West Virginia in terms of what we're making here in Virginia. So I said about 45%, 50% is fossil fuel fired power in Virginia. We've got about 30% of the electricity generated in Virginia comes from the nuclear units that are in Louisa County and Surry County. And then so this is a great question. What mix of renewable energy? We've got, I think, about 5% of our energy today is solar. Under development today right now are large offshore wind projects 27 miles off the coast of Virginia Beach that are going to provide 2.6 gigawatts, the first tranche, and they're going to plan a second and a third tranche. So more of that to come, perhaps. But the big picture, Jackie, to your question is sort of, is it possible to have a clean energy grid, right? And there's several different answers to that question that all lead to yes. So the National Renewable Energy Laboratories did some modeling for the nation, not specifically for Virginia, but for the US as a whole, back in 2022, to see if we could reasonably meet President Biden's goal of a carbon-free energy grid by 2035. So NREL, the experts at the US Department of Energy, modeled this. They did like 4 different pathways to meeting this goal, showed it was possible. We do similar modeling in all of our states mostly done by our utilities and then reviewed by our utility commissioners. In Virginia, we're actually undergoing that process right now. Dominion Energy Virginia has put forward their models. We are currently in that regulatory proceeding with our friends, the Southern Environmental Law Center, and putting forward our own modeling of how we're going to achieve this carbon-free grid by mid-century. So short answer, yes, it's possible. And I'll be happy to share some of those details with you as we develop them.
Great, thanks so much. And I just want to flag if someone might be able to address Paula's question and a previous comment in the chat. Appreciate that. I'm going to start sharing my screen again, and then as I pass it back to Matt to let us know about advocacy opportunities.
Thanks, Justin. Those are some fantastic questions, and we'll try to get to 1 or 2 of those that we didn't get to answer live in the chat. So, how do we talk to our legislators, and how do we encourage our legislators to help ensure that these energy, pipeline safety, data center accountability, affordability, and environmental bills are successful? We can jump to the next slide. First, what we want to do is a little bit of homework. The website that's on the screen, we can drop into the chat. That allows you to put in your address and find out who your legislator is and how you can contact them. Next, we're going to need to do a little bit of homework to identify the bills that we want to highlight, what their bill numbers are. House bills start with the prefix HB, and Senate bills start with the prefix SB. And this webinar is a great place to start in finding those bills that are important for our region. Do you support or oppose the bill? And most importantly, is to tell your story. Let your legislator know how this bill is going to impact you and your family and your household expenses and your community and your neighbors. That's so powerful in them understanding how these bills impact you and your neighborhood. We can jump to the next slide. And you can make your voice heard in a number of ways. First, you can call your legislator before the bill hearing. You'll probably talk to a legislative aide rather than the legislator themselves, as they're often in committee meetings or caucus meetings. So be prepared to leave a message. You can testify in person or virtually at a committee hearing. And, just like leaving a message, be prepared to be brief and concise. You'll probably only have a maximum time limit of about 3 minutes and maybe even less than that. You can also write to your legislator or provide a written comment to the committee prior to a bill hearing. In all of these cases, you're going to want to note the bill number, the patron, whether you support or oppose the bill, where you live, and again, most importantly, your story and how this is going to impact you and your family and your neighborhood. And we'll have action alerts for the priority legislation that we've talked about this evening, as well as probably some other ones that are yet to drop. So make sure you sign up for those. We'll have a link here shortly to keep abreast of all of this legislation. And then finally, you can join a either in-person or virtual lobby day. There are 2 in-person lobby days coming up next week, and these events are a lot of fun. Food is generally provided. You can have staff schedule legislator meetings for you, escort you into the General Assembly building and right to the offices and introduce you. They'll have talking points documents available, and they're just a fantastic opportunity to meet like-minded advocates from across the Commonwealth. And if you can't make it to Richmond in person, we'll be hosting a lunchtime lobby hour next Friday to help advocate for bills that impact Appalachia. So we'll have registration for that also here soon. And finally, before we wrap up for the evening, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Also would like to thank Jen Lawhorn and Jessica Sims for running technology behind the scenes this evening. Be sure to check out our Virginia General Assembly page for updates. Follow us on social media, and if you're not on our email list, make sure you sign up for that so you don't miss any of the time-sensitive votes and action this session. And then finally, before we bid you good night, thank you so much for joining us. We genuinely appreciate you and your time, and our work would not be possible without the support of you all. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a fantastic evening.